The town of Dingle sits where the land leans into the Atlantic, a small bright crown of painted houses around a dark, quiet harbour. By day, the streets bustle with visitors and locals, gulls cry over the masts, and the wind smells of salt and diesel and seaweed. When evening comes, voices soften, doors close, and the water in the harbour turns to black glass. A few windows still throw warm squares of light onto the street. Somewhere, a fiddle starts, a drum answers, and then the long, sorrowful voice of the pipes rises and floats for a moment before the night swallows it. But there is another piper here, and he does not play inside. He does not pass a hat, or take a bow, or sit with a drink after a tune. He waits for the moon to climb, and for the tide to turn, and for the air to go still. Then, when the silver path lies across the bay like a strip of silk, he begins. His music does not bounce off the walls of any room. It slips over the water. It slides under doors. It follows people home. They call him the Moonlit Piper, and this is how his song began. More than a century ago there lived a man named Seamus Duffy. He was born into a fishing family and learned the weight of nets and the names of winds before he could read. But Seamus had a gift that did not belong to boats or ropes. He could hear a tune once and play it back at once, and not only copy it, but fit it to the room and the mood and the moment so perfectly that people forgot they were tired or angry or sad. The pipes seemed to breathe with him. He could lift a crowd like a wave and then lay them flat and quiet on the sand with a single slow air. By the time he was a young man, people knew him from Dingle to Tralee, and from the mainland out to the islands. He loved the crowds, loved the whirl and the clatter, and the stomp of a good reel in a low room, but he loved the sea even more. On calm nights he would row out alone toward Dunmore Head, set his oars inside the boat, and let the slow pull of tide and moon carry him while he played to the cliffs. He said the echo there was honest. The rock did not flatter or forgive. It gave back exactly what you sent up to it. He liked that. One July evening, when the air felt like warm water and the harbour smelled sweet, the whole town gathered for a wedding by the pier. Torches made the cobbles shine. Children ran underfoot. The bride and groom danced, and Seamus sat on a barrel with his pipes across his knees and played tune after tune. A group of sailors from a merchant ship stood at the edge of the crowd, drinking and grinning. When the music paused, one of them, a big man with a red scarf at his neck, called out that he had heard the cliffs at Dunmore would turn a man's music to nothing, and that no one could make a tune carry from there back to the town. "You have not heard Duffy," someone said. Seamus smiled without looking up. The red scarf man shrugged and raised his drink. "Play from the headland then," he said. "Let the whole town hear. If we hear it, we'll cheer you. If we don't, finish your night at the bar like the rest of us." Seamus stood, slung the pipes, and stepped down to his small boat. "I'll play from the rocks," he said, cheerful and proud. "You'll think the sea itself has learned a tune." He pushed off and rowed, a pale figure and a dark boat in a white path of moonlight, out toward the shape of the headland. The night was kind. The water lay flat as a plate. No wind tugged at the lanterns, no wave slapped the pier. People waited, laughing, teasing, betting on how far the sound would carry. Time went strange, as it does when a crowd waits for a thing it cannot hurry. Someone started to wonder aloud if they should have stopped him. Then, faint and sure, a line of notes came back from the dark. It was not loud, but it was true. A laugh rose and turned into a cheer, and men clapped each other on the shoulder, and the bride leaned into the groom and said, "There he is." No one knows when the music stopped. The cheer faded, the torches burned lower, the moon slid down the sky an inch at a time, and the children fell asleep on their mothers' laps. When the first pale stripe of dawn reached the hills, 2 men in a skiff went to find Seamus and tell him to come home to breakfast. They found his boat drifting near the rocks. His pipes lay across the seat, dry and spotless. Seamus was gone. They searched that day and the next and the next. Boats combed the inlets. Men walked the shore shoulder to shoulder, peering into weed and crevice. Divers slid into the water and came up shaking their heads, cold to the bone and unsettled by something they could not name. There had been no storm. No one had heard a cry. No rope was cut. No plank was cracked. No mark was left. The boat was sound. The sea was calm. The man was missing. 2 weeks later, a fisherman named Brendan was out late, hauling a net by moonlight. The harbour lights were few and far. The headland lay like a sleeping animal against the sky. He worked in a hush broken only by rope on wood and the soft hiss of water on the hull. Then he heard the pipes, slow, clear, so clean he felt it in his teeth. He raised his head, expecting to see a friend in another boat. There was only the bay, flat and empty. The music came again, closer. Brendan turned toward the headland, and his mouth went dry. A man stood on the rocks, outlined in silver. He did not move, and yet the music swelled and wrapped around the boat as if the air itself played. Brendan wanted to call out, but he could not form a word. The figure turned its head toward him, and where a face should have been, there was a hollow of shadow, as if the moon refused to fill that space. The tune rose to a high, pure note that seemed to slice the night in two. Brendan shut his eyes. When he opened them, the rocks were empty, and the sound had become only the whisper of the tide. Brendan told no one for a week. When he did, he told his brother first, and his brother said nothing for a long time, and then said he had heard the same tune the night before, but from behind him, in the empty space between his back and the stern. After that, the story grew legs. A woman walking home by the quay heard pipes drifting down a lane and smelled damp rope, though the stones were dry. A watchman on the hill felt a soft pressure at his ears, and then a slow air unrolled inside his head, though the night stood still around him. A boy waking from a dream sat up in bed and found the room full of music and cold. He cried out. His mother came and felt the temperature change like the door of a winter pantry opened in summer. She said a prayer she had not said in years and held the boy until the sound faded. Years passed. The town went on, boats going out at dawn and back at dusk, nets mended, engines fixed, stories told at bars with low ceilings. The Moonlit Piper kept his own calendar. He came on nights when the sea was like a mirror, and the moon threw a silver stripe from the headland to the pier. He stood where rock meets water, or where the old pier stones meet the tide, or, more than once, halfway along the strand at low water, as if he had walked out on a road no one else could see. He never showed in a storm. He never came in rain. The wind would have shredded his music. He wanted the clean, still air. The room a calm night gives a sound. People learned small rules. If you heard the pipes, you did not speak for a moment. You listened. You wished yourself home safe. If you were at sea and the tune came strong from nowhere, you changed course for sure. If you were on the rocks and the sound came from ahead, you did not follow. A few did not learn. Their names are the bitter bones of the story. A lad from Tralee, proud and stubborn, took a flashlight and a rope and said he wanted to look the piper in the eye. They found the rope on the stones and marks like heel prints leading down to a pool, and then nothing at all. Tom Flaherty, who kept lobster pots off the headland, tells a different version. He was alone one night, lifting a pot, when he felt a weight in the air, a kind of hush that presses on the skin. The pipes came then, a sharp little phrase repeated and repeated, not a tune so much as a call. It made his hands clumsy and his jaw tight. He turned the boat without thinking. 10 minutes later, a wall of wind hit the bay so hard it knocked a buoy flat and sent a green sheet over the pier. Men on shore swore they had never seen a squall arrive so fast out of a clear sky. If I had kept to the pots, Tom said, I would have gone under. The call was for me to go home. Not everyone agrees, the piper warns. An old man named Patrick used to shake his head when people said so. He said he had lost a cousin who had been hearing the music for a week before a calm day capsize took him. The tune was for him, Patrick said, and the sea came to collect. When asked why the sea would warn and also take, he spread his hands and said, "The sea is not a person with one mood." A shopkeeper named Mary heard the piper a few summers ago while locking her door. She had set the key and felt the click when a tune rose up so close behind her that she flinched and turned. The street was empty. The air smelled of wet rope and old wood, like a boathouse at night. The tune was a lullaby her grandmother had sung on winter evenings, slow and soft, and as it moved past her into the dark, it made the hair on her arms rise. She went inside and sat on the floor until her breathing calmed. Later she said the scariest part was not the tune itself, but the way it felt like someone had breathed it into her ear. A pair of campers at Ventry followed the sound along the beach one still night, laughing at themselves for being spooked, the way people joke when a story starts to feel heavy. The music drew them to the rocks. There stood a man, back turned, coat hanging heavy to mid-calf, pipes under his arm. The tune rose and fell with a grace that made the hair on their necks lift. They called out, bold enough with two voices. The man did not move. They stepped closer. The music swelled until it seemed to shake the air. Then, with no fade and no echo, it stopped, as if a door had closed. The rocks were empty. The campers walked back along the beach in silence and did not speak about it until noon. Others have heard the tune from the water itself. A group of night swimmers at Inch slid into a bay that looked as harmless as a mirror. As they swam, a phrase repeated under the surface, faint and steady, not quite music, but too ordered to be anything else. One by one they turned and swam for shore without a word, as if they had agreed on it in a dream. A kayaker paddling home at dusk from farther down the coast once said the sound came so clean and close he thought it must be inside the hull of his own boat, as if the wood had learned a song and wanted to teach it to his hands. He paused, and his paddle dripped moonlight, and the tune felt like it came from a point just behind his left shoulder, and also from 200 yards ahead. He did not wait for a second verse. People tell a story about a bus driver on the road past the headland. He had finished a late run and was driving an empty coach back to town. The moon laid a pale sheet over the sea, and the road was as quiet as the inside of a pocket. The pipes came in through the driver's window. There was no other word for it, and the hair lifted on the back of his neck. He slowed without thinking. A lame sheep crossed the road a heartbeat later. If he had not slowed, he would have hit it and gone into the wall. He sat there a minute with his hands on the wheel, the tune fading, the sheep limping off, and he said thank you to the empty road and meant it. Years after Seamus Duffy vanished, a cousin of his named Ellen found a small wooden box in a trunk that had belonged to his mother. Inside was a scrap of paper with a few lines of notes drawn by hand, and under them, in a quick, neat script, the words, "A tune the sea gave back to me." Ellen kept the paper in a drawer for years. When she was old, she took it to the school and asked a young music teacher to play it. The teacher said it was simple, like a call to begin a longer piece. That night, a neighbour walking by Ellen's cottage said he heard pipes and saw a tall man in the lane. When he reached the gate, there was no one. In the morning, Ellen told no one, but she burned the paper in the sink and watched the smoke vanish up the flue. A year or two ago, a man who makes small films for the internet came to town to collect stories. He carried a good camera and a neat microphone and a smile that worked on doors. People told him what they would tell, and he wrote it down. He walked the headland in daylight and set up on the rocks at night. He filmed the moon track on the water. He talked to the camera with his whisper voice. At about 2 a.m, he lowered the microphone to the edge of the rocks and stood very still. After a while he shouted once and then laughed at himself, and then he stopped laughing. His body changed the way a dog's body changes when it hears a note we do not hear. He lifted the microphone and slowly set it down. He reached toward the empty air and stopped, as if his hand had met a pane of glass. Later, he played his recording back for a woman at the guest house. It was mostly wind and small wave noise and the far hum of a generator. Then there was a shape of sound, a place where the noise bent around something that was not there. The woman said she did not want to hear it again and asked him to turn it off. He slept that afternoon with the curtains open and left at dawn the next day. A teacher named Brian was walking the cliff path one summer evening when he saw a man ahead of him, coat moving in no wind, a case under one arm. He thought for a moment that it was a tourist in old clothes, and then the stillness came down and he knew better. He stopped. The figure kept its distance as if painted on the path ahead. Brian called out. The figure did not turn. The music started very low, the way a kettle begins to think about boiling. Brian took one step and then another, and then stopped again and said aloud, "No," and stood still until the air let him go and the figure was gone. When he reached the point in the path where it had been, the air was colder by a degree, like a hand dipped in a well. Not every sighting is a warning or a pull. Once in a long while, the tune feels like effort, like someone on the edge of sleep trying to wake. On a beach farther along the coast, a girl named Hannah found a line of footprints at low tide that came from the water and stopped halfway to the dunes as if the maker had vanished. The prints were deeper where a person would push off to take a step. There was sand filling the edges. They were not new. Hannah stood by them and heard pipes far out at sea, and then a voice called her name from very close by. It was her father. He had come looking. She did not see him until he touched her shoulder. They went home across the hard sand in silence. Every story comes back to Seamus Duffy, the man with the pride and the boat and the bright night. People argue about what happened. Some say the water took him cleanly and kept him, and that he is the figure on the rocks, still playing the last promise he made, because a promise is a hook the sea respects. Some say the fairies under the waves heard his music and wanted it for themselves, and made a place for him in a bright hall where tunes never end and time does not count, and that what we hear on certain nights is only the spill from a door left carelessly ajar. Some say there was another man on the headland that night, someone who envied Seamus and pushed him and left the pipes as a neat explanation, and that the piper is not Seamus at all, but Justice with a tune. It is hard to prove a thing about a figure made of darkness and moonlight. What people do, in the absence of proof, is make rules that keep them safe. Do not walk onto wet rocks by night. Do not chase a sound you cannot place. When a tune comes out of nowhere and the air goes cold, turn for home. If you are on the water and the pipes rise up behind your left shoulder, keep your head and count your breaths and set a slow course toward the pier. If you are at the headland and see a coat with no wind to lift it, say the name you love best and step back 3 steps and then 3 more. On some nights the piper feels like protection. On others he feels like a test. On a very few, he feels like a hand reached out from the wrong side of a door. Dingle lives with him the way any town lives with its dangers and its blessings, with a mix of pride and fear and habit. The harbour still fills at dawn, the boats still go, the pubs still warm the dark with tunes and talk, tourists still pose at the rail and say how quiet and magical it all is. And then a night comes when the wind falls and the moon draws a path across the bay and a single clear note calls the town to listen. Somewhere, a fisherman pauses with his hand on a rope and waits for the second bar. Somewhere, a woman at a sink turns off the tap and stands with her head tilted like a bird's. Somewhere, a boy in bed opens his eyes into the dark and decides not to lift the curtain. The tune rises and falls and threads through the houses and lanes and sheds, and along the shore and out across the flat calm water toward the rocks. On those nights you could believe, if you were the kind of person who believes, that the whole town is a single instrument, and the piper knows how to play it. And when the last note slides away, and the silence comes back, soft and complete, you could believe that a bargain was kept, or a warning was heard, or a name was spared. You could also believe that nothing happened at all, and that the stories make the night longer in a good way. But if you ever stand on the pier with the silver path laid down like a road to the headland, and the line of the rocks sharp as a cut, and a man appears there, still and thin in the moonlight, and the music comes in clean and sure as breath, you will not care what other people believe. You will stand and listen. You will feel the cold reach of it along your skin and the soft shape of it inside your chest. You will think of home. You will think of every promise you ever made, and you will not step forward because you will know, as surely as you know your own name, that the Moonlit Piper does not play for everyone. On nights like that, he plays for someone, and you had better hope it is not you.